we continue with the basic concept of Scrooge and the rest of them exploring. Just like with other episodes, just like with a couple of other episodes prior, we continue with the concept of Scrooge being the basic explorer that he's been before, like with like with adventures in the original DuckTales series, and with a lot of his adventures in Scrooge McDuck comics. This episode continues with that concept of Scrooge being the basic adventurer that he's been, and we just get a basic concept here with Scrooge wanting to explore Mount Neverest, and he's wanting to be the one to make it to the top, uh, the first one to make it to the actual top. Now, one thing that I took notice of early on with the concept of Mount Neverest and the guy that was hanging from it, I wondered immediately who the guy was that never made it to the top. One thing that I really love about this particular episode is the atmosphere with the scenery, the backdrops with the ominous looking mountain in this particular episode. This is now, as far as the scenery goes, this is definitely my favorite episode so far, because I love the atmospheric scenery that they used in this particular episode. The scenery backdrops, the ominous looking mountain in the background looming over them, it's really, really beautiful. And then there's a lot of mystery and element to, and also I love the scenery. You got the gray sky, you got the gray looking sky above, and you got this beautiful snow. There's a lot to this particular episode in terms of the layout and the overall look to everything. It really is beautiful. If not, basically dark and foreboding. But that's an element, but that's pretty much winter in general. It's basically winter in general. But the scenery around this is just absolutely beautiful. And this is definitely my favorite episode because of the scenery featured. But there's an interesting gimmick going on with this episode, with Scrooge wanting to be the one to make it to the top. And the scenery, not just the scenery, but the atmosphere with the snow and everything playing out is also really cool as well. It really adds a dark tone to the episode, and it adds more of a darker feel to it. And I had to wonder what was going, and honestly I wondered what was going on in this episode. But the cave scenery ended up kind of revealing it with the characters. But it was interesting because at first I thought this episode was just a basic thing with Scrooge wanting to explore Mount Neverest. But as it turns out, there was more going on. The first glimpse that there was something else kind of going up was whenever Scrooge made the mention about there will not be any more ninnies on this mountain. That's the moment that I thought, wait, were you the Neverest ninny? I honestly first had that inclination. Whenever they ended up encountering this rock for the second time, I honestly thought at first that maybe they just got turned around with the snow, with the fog and the snow. Maybe they just got turned around. But then I began to wonder if there was, what was going on. There was somehow like maybe a time warp or something that was causing them to re-loop over and over again. And then they honestly ended up encountering the dude that was dead. And he ended up writing on the wall, "Curse you, McDuck." And honestly, I have Scrooge's line about if he had a nickel for every single time, if he had money for every single time that someone cursed his name, he would be twice as rich. That's honestly true, because if with the comics and and then DuckTales, all the enemies that he's made, yes, I would have to say that is completely true. But it was, the backstory with this particular episode was very, very interesting, I gotta say. With the backstory with this particular episode was extremely interesting. Scrooge making the mention he made his first million, and he wanted to commemorate it by doing something big. So he ended up pulling kind of a launch pad here. He wanted to take preparations, and I'm not going to deny this was pretty much me at BronyCon 2019. This was pretty much me. But I'm not going to deny, with what Scrooge said, this guy was a conniving, deceiving sort. He told Scrooge to let go. Scrooge didn't want to let go of the gear. Instead of just simply making the way back down the mountain, the guy decided to cut Scrooge loose, not even knowing if Scrooge could survive the fall. And he laughed. He was completely jolly about it. So honestly, what Scrooge said about this guy here, I don't blame Scrooge, honestly, because, and then this guy seems to have had the audacity. He could have made his way back down the mountain, but instead, he proceeded to the top, got this far, and froze to death, and yet cursed Scrooge's name. Even though Scrooge was not present, he still had to blame it on someone. So yeah, I think this guy got what he deserved. In this moment, whenever Scrooge made the remark that now he's made it farther, okay, I gotta say, Huey's here getting kind of a bit, I guess, surprised in a bad way with Scrooge walking past the guy, and I guess being shocked that Scrooge would do something like that. I guess you could call it disrespecting the dead. The guy's dead. He's not going to know. He's like, who cares? The guy's dead. I don't blame Scrooge whatsoever, honestly. And if that makes me a bad person, then I guess I'm a bad person. Like what Scrooge said, this guy was a backstabbing braggart that almost got him killed. The guy was backstabbing. He let Scrooge go. And was the bragging type, obviously. We don't see any inclinations of that, but Scrooge had that inclination of him. And the guy deliberately cut Scrooge loose and then made it to this cave, but yet still cursed Scrooge's name even though Scrooge was not present. So, yeah, I don't blame Scrooge. And I don't believe in that concept of, someone I know would say that that was disrespectful of Scrooge. The guy's dead, disrespect him. He's dead. He doesn't care. He's not going to know. Who cares? He's dead. I'm not one of those people that are like, let's not disrespect the dead. They're dead, okay? I think it's funny, though, Huey makes the mention, I think the mountain got even for you. That's very much true, yes. And there was a very intense scenario where here Scrooge wanted to make it farther than that guy. Scrooge wanted to make it to the top. Huey, however, was trying to use common sense. They were out of supplies. There was a risk of hypothermia, freezing to death, freezing to death, not so much starving to death, but there was something going on with the mountain. They kept getting back and forth to the top. And so honestly, I don't blame. I am more siding with Huey on this, on the use of common sense and the risk factor, but I also can understand Scrooge's point. He kind of had it drilled into his head. He wanted to surpass the other guy, make it to the top, and he had that goal focused. He was goal focused on that. And then they found out that the reason why that they were constantly moving back and forth was because the mountain had portals that kept opening, that enabled them to be able to move back and forth without, across the mountain. It said it was a wormhole, but honestly this made me think more like this was GLaDOS related from Portal. That's more what it made me think of. But the moment that Scrooge tried to go through the portals and he just kept getting tossed back onto the same rock, it made me realize that the mountain might not have been wanting anyone to make it to the top. Huey expressed that. And this was a moment here where Huey made the remark that sometimes the most difficult thing that an adventurer has to do is sometimes just step down. And it was a moment here where Scrooge realized he had to think. He had to see his family there. He was trying for something that he probably wouldn't be able to do. The mountain would not let him to the top no matter how much he tried. And no matter how much he attempted, he wouldn't be able to get to the top. Constantly doing so, he was also putting his family at risk for something. And so he needed to try to realize he needed to just step down. So he made the wise call of choosing to step down and agreeing to just, he's made it farther than anyone. Just be happy with that. And like I said, the scenery with this, the art style, and the intensity of the scene with the avalanche was just really, really awesome. It was a very intense scene, and just how it played out was really, really intense. It was a really great scene, and I loved how the animation did that. But we did notice that the portals, they would travel through the portals, and it enabled them to be able to get down the mountain. Now, one thing that I thought of during this segment is I wondered, was the mountain a sort of a living entity? That the mountain was deliberately helping them to get down the mountain? Was the mountain actually creating these portals in different locations so that it could help them down the mountain, or were the portals just there? I think it's an interesting concept. It doesn't really say specifically either way which is which, and I think it just leaves it up to you to kind of make your mind up which one you want to believe. Interestingly enough, Scrooge gives Huey the shirt and said that's not the end of their adventures. And as the map flies up into the sky, it actually travels right through a portal, lands right on top of the mountain at the very peak. So like I said, I wonder if maybe the mountain itself is alive and it is deliberately creating these portals in different locations. But there was interesting gimmicks here. They made a mention about it being Christmas. There was no other mentions about Christmas throughout the rest of the episode, but every single one of them kind of had a thing. Louie wanted to seek treasure. Huey wanted to help, wanted to be there at the top. But like I said, the overall scene of this mountain was just absolutely beautiful. I love the style of the animation that they did with this. And something using, I don't know if it's Toon Boom or Flash, exactly which one that they're using, or different Flash-based animation that they're using for this. But I gotta say, the atmosphere and the overall look and tone of the mountain is beautiful in this episode. I was very awestruck throughout this episode with just the layout, the background of the mountain, the sort of serene, ominous look that it has. It's hauntingly beautiful and beautifully haunting. And it really adds such a beautiful backdrop to this. And I love the winter scenery here, and just how that it looks. It's cold, it looks cold, and there's a dark feel. There's like a very calm kind of feel, but also ominous in the air, because you have this looming mountain, Mount Neverest, in the background. And it's beautiful. It's like something that it's dangerous up close, but if you keep your distance, it's safe. And it's interesting to see that, and it really is beautiful. I love the scenery and the backdrop with this. It's just gorgeous. And like I said, I really enjoyed the setup with Scrooge here. He wanted to make his way to the top of the mountain because he had a goal in mind, which was to try to be the first person to make it to the top of the mountain. And he also, I think, it wasn't just that, but there was another thing driving him, which was that he wanted to go back and erase the title of the Neverest Ninny that people had used for him. It wasn't just that he wanted to be the first one at the top. Another thing that was driving him was that he wanted to clear his name. He wanted to make it to the top so that he would no longer be the Neverest Ninny. And he made the remark that way no one would call him a ninny anymore. But Huey said no one had used the word ninny in 75 years. So Scrooge was kind of a bit, to a degree, lost in the past with letting that bother him, but nobody knew that it was him. So, like, no one knew that it was him. Plus, Scrooge, he's a multi-billionaire. like he's the richest duck in the world. He surpassed the other guy. He's still alive. The other guy is dead. His body is in a cave on Mount Neverest. And his last thing that he wrote was "Curse you, McDuck." So he was bitter in his last time, with his last breath. Scrooge, however, he's still got his family, he's got his money, of course, and he's out having adventures with them. And so Scrooge is definitely more on top. But I can't understand Scrooge kind of wanting to, reclaim, erase that bad title and start fresh, kind of have something new. So I don't blame him honestly for that, but he was letting that drive him, and because of that focus, he was kind of having a bit of a tunnel vision, in which he wasn't seeing anything else outside of that. He wasn't taking into account the dangers that there might have been and the risk of those around him. He was just more focused on that. That's not painting Scrooge as a bad guy whatsoever, because realistically, everybody in general, at some points, we too have moments of weakness where we succumb to a desire, a drive like that, and we end up losing focus of things around us, of the risk factor. And it's realistic, and so I'm not whatsoever saying that Scrooge is painted in a negative light, because it is very much realistic. There's one of those scenarios as well where Huey was the one using common sense, trying to tell Scrooge they lack supplies and they need to go back. They need to call it quits. They've gotten farther than anyone. There comes a time whenever you have to say, I'm done. This is as far as I'm going to go. Because trying to go farther could possibly break you, mentally, emotionally, even physically. And Huey was trying to use common sense here. And I really admire that, because I think it's really cool that they did that, because it does show that Huey, as well as the others, sometimes they have that maturity and they're able to look at a situation from outside of the perspective of someone else and be able to use logic and reason and common sense and help someone else to be like Scrooge in this situation. They helped him to be able to realize, I need to quit, I need to stop. And it's very much realistic, and it's one of those things where, sometimes you can become so driven, so focused on something, you lose sight of other things around you, and it takes your family and friends, it takes a really good family member, or it takes a close family member, or a really close friend to help you realize, yo, you need to quit before you get hurt, mentally, physically, or emotionally, or all of the above. So this was a very interesting episode for that. I honestly really enjoyed it. Another thing that I really enjoyed, it's a small little thing, but the thing that Louis was not going. He made the remark, "No one cons his family." Launchpad was taken advantage of. We've seen this before in real life. Someone thinks you're stupid, so they try to take advantage of you, mark up prices, try to sell you, try to sell you a bridge somewhere. And they try to take advantage of you because they think you're gullible, because they think you're stupid. Honestly, I've been in that situation before. I've had people try to take advantage of me like that before, and it was one of those situations where you have to try to understand and realize that they are trying to take advantage of you, so forget it, screw you, I'm not falling for it. Launchpad fell for it, but he had Louis watching his back, so Louis was able to help Launchpad, but he was also able to get revenge with the other guy and make sure that the other guy did not take advantage of anyone else again by pulling a prank. By completely pulling a prank, and which put the other guy out of business and probably on the wanted list of everybody in this town. So Louis might have, you could say that Louis might have went overboard there, but honestly, he exposed the guy for the fraud that he was, and so I'd say what Louis done was just. But I really enjoyed this episode. In terms of the story and the setting, this is definitely one of my favorite episodes, especially for the scenery. It's definitely my favorite. And for the story, I really enjoyed the story of it. It had a very serene but very real feel to it, and I really enjoyed that. I really loved this episode and how that it played out, the story, and the backdrops. It was gorgeous. And I really, really enjoyed this episode. It was really fun. So thank you to everybody that made this. Thank you, Disney, everybody that made this, and the writers, animators, thank you so much. I mean, the backdrops are gorgeous in this. I love it. And I also really enjoyed the writing with this episode as well, and I love the scenery. And like I said, I know some people I've seen before, people make their mentions, not to me, but I've seen it online before. People make the mentions about, you need to respect the dead. They're dead, okay? I can have respect for the dead to a degree, but uh, I believe basically pretty much this. If I didn't have respect for someone whenever they were alive, I'm not going to have respect for them when they're dead. So them being dead isn't going to make me suddenly have respect for them. If I didn't have respect for someone whenever they were alive, I'm not going to have respect for them whenever they're dead. I was saying the other night that whenever my boss croaks, I'm going to probably go to his funeral and bring streamers and a party hat, and I'm going to be the one celebrating. I said that would be me. And I know some people wouldn't agree with that and say that's disrespectful. Like I said, if I don't have respect for them when they're alive, I'm not going to have respect for them when they're dead. So I'm like Scrooge on this, and I'm not apologizing for that. And I know some of you feel the exact same way. I don't think that them being dead suddenly should make you, oh my gosh, I suddenly have respect for them now that they're dead. What's the point? But again, thank you to everybody. Thank you, Disney, everyone that made this. Thank you all so much.